The folder was navy blue, and it was sitting on the kitchen table when I came downstairs. I remember that detail more clearly than almost anything else from that morning, because navy blue was my favorite color, and for one stupid, hopeful second I thought he had bought me something. A gift. A card. Some small apology for the way he'd been treating me since I got home from the hospital. I was 6 days out from surgery. My throat still had the tape line where they had gone in to take out half my thyroid. My voice came out rough and low, like I'd been shouting at a concert, except I hadn't been shouting at anything. I'd been lying in a recovery bed asking a nurse whether the lump had been what they were afraid of. It hadn't been. I was going to be fine. I had come home to heal. Dorian was standing by the counter with his coat already on. Coat on, at 7 in the morning, in his own house. And he slid that navy folder an inch toward me across the table and said, "I need you to read this and sign the last page." I opened it. Petition for dissolution of marriage, my name, his name, 23 years of marriage reduced to a caption on a legal document. I didn't scream. I want you to understand that, because everything that comes after depends on it. I didn't cry, and I didn't beg, and I didn't throw the mug of tea that was cooling in my hand. Something in me went very still and very cold. Not loud, not dramatic. Just still, the way a house gets still right before a storm changes direction. And Dorian, watching my face, mistook that stillness for defeat. He always did. "Look," he said, gentler now, "the way you talk to someone you've already decided is finished. I didn't want to do it like this. But you're going to be okay. The doctor said so, and I can't keep pretending. I've met someone. And before you make this ugly, Mara, you should know a lawyer already told me how this goes. The business is mine. The accounts are mine. You'll get your half of the house. That's fair, but let's be honest." He paused, and here it is, the sentence I will carry to my grave. "You have nothing without me. You never did." I set the mug down. I looked at the papers, and then I did the thing that confused him more than any amount of crying would have. I picked up the pen, and I signed. "Stay with me, because you are about to watch a man hand a loaded truth to the one person in the world who knew exactly how to load it. My name is Mara Ellison. I am 48 years old, and for most of my life I was the reliable one. Not the pretty one, not the fun one, not the one anybody wrote stories about. The reliable one. Thank you for watching. The one who remembered the passwords and the anniversaries and the exact date the insurance was due. The one who could look at a mess and quietly put it in order while everyone else was still deciding whose fault it was. For years I believed that being needed and being loved were the same thing. That if I made myself essential enough, if I balanced enough books, caught enough mistakes, carried enough of the weight, then I would be safe. That nobody leaves the person who holds everything together. I was wrong about that. But I want to be honest with you. I was not wrong about the holding. I grew up the middle child of 5 in a small town in Ohio, in a house where money was always a sentence away from an argument. My father worked at a parts plant and did the books for 3 local businesses on the side, at the kitchen table, with a green ledger and a mechanical pencil. I used to sit across from him and watch him work. He was not a warm man, my dad. He didn't hug much. But he taught me something I have used every single day of my adult life. "Mara," he told me once, when I was maybe 14, "people will tell you all kinds of things about what they own and what they owe. Paper doesn't lie. Keep the paper. Keep your own copy of the paper. And never, ever sign something you haven't read twice. Keep the paper. I want you to remember that, because it comes back." I put myself through community college doing bookkeeping for a car dealership at night. I got my associate's degree in accounting, and then I got a job at a mid-sized construction supply company, and within 4 years I was running their entire back office. Payroll, invoicing, contracts, tax filings, the whole engine room. I was good. I was quiet, and I was good, and in this world those two things together often mean nobody notices you until the day they can't find you. That's where I met Dorian. He came into the supply company as a contractor. Custom millwork cabinetry, built-ins, staircases, the beautiful expensive woodwork that goes into the kind of houses I'd never live in. He was 30 then, charming in the way of men who have always been forgiven for things, with sawdust on his forearms and a laugh that filled a room. He'd come to the counter to argue about an invoice, and I'd win, politely, and he started coming back just to lose. I'd like to tell you I saw the warning signs. I told myself a lot of things over the years that turned out not to be true, and the first one was this: that his need to be the center of every room was just confidence, and that confidence was a good thing in a man who wanted to build a business. We married when I was 25, and within 2 years, Dorian had a dream. He wanted to start his own shop, Veil Craft. He wanted to call it his last name, Veil, on a hand-routed sign. He had the talent, I'll give him that. He could look at a raw plank and see the finished stair rail inside it. What he did not have was money, or credit, or the first idea how to run anything with more than one moving part. I had $11,000. It was every cent I had saved since I was 19, working nights over that green ledger in my head. And I had something else. I had my father's voice. So when I gave Dorian that $11,000 to start Veil Craft, I did not give it to him. I want to be precise about this, because it is the whole story. I lent it to him. I drew up a promissory note, a real one, notarized at the bank, with a repayment schedule and an interest rate and a clause that converted the unpaid balance into an ownership stake if the loan wasn't repaid on schedule. And it wasn't repaid on schedule, because we needed every dollar to grow, and I kept lending, and every loan got its own note. $5,000 here, $12,000 there, $31,000 the year we bought the first real CNC machine. Dorian signed every one of them. He'd laugh while he did it. "You and your paperwork," he'd say, kissing the top of my head. "Like I'm going to run off with the router." Ha! I filed every note in a fireproof box, and I kept my own copy in a safe deposit box at a bank across town that Dorian didn't use. Keep your own copy of the paper. For 11 years I ran that company. Not officially. Officially Dorian Veil was the owner, the face, the artist. But I did the payroll and the invoicing and the contracts. I read every lease. When we moved the shop into the big building on Fenwick Road, it was my due diligence that caught that the landlord was trying to slip in a clause that would have let him triple the rent after year 2. And it was my name because I insisted, because I was the one with the credit score that went on the lease we signed instead. I want you to sit with that for a second. His name was on the sign. My name was on the loans, the shares, and the building. And somehow, over 23 years, that arrangement became invisible. To him, to his mother, to our friends. Even, if I'm honest, a little to me. The erosion happens so slowly you mistake it for weather. It started with the way he told the story. At dinner parties, Dorian would talk about building Veil Craft with my bare hands, and I'd be sitting right there, and he wouldn't be lying exactly. But there was no room in the sentence for me. I told myself he was just a good storyteller. I told myself the me in the story was implied. Then it was money. Somewhere in year 12. Dorian decided he should handle the vision and I should handle the details, which sounded fair until I realized the vision came with a new truck and a boat and a country club membership, and the details came with me clipping coupons and driving a 9-year-old Honda. When I raised it, he'd get this wounded look, like I was small for counting. "You're always counting, Mara. It's exhausting. Can't you just trust that I've got us handled?" Then it was his mother, Renata. Dorian's mother had never liked me. I was too plain, too quiet, too much of a bookkeeper for her only son, who deserved, in her words, someone with a little more life in her. Renata had a way of complimenting you that left a mark. "Mara's so practical," she'd say, "the way you'd describe a good dishwasher." Over the years she stopped even doing that. At family gatherings she'd talk over me, seat me at the far end, ask Dorian questions about his business as though I were the help. And I let it happen. That's the part I have to own. Every time I swallowed it, I told myself I was keeping the peace. What I was actually doing was teaching everyone, including my husband, that I would absorb any amount of disrespect and keep the books balanced anyway. The last few years, there was a new brightness to Dorian that I mistook for a man rediscovering his energy. New clothes, the gym. He started keeping his phone face down. He'd take calls in the truck. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I'm the one who notices. But I told myself a story, because the truth was too big to hold while I was also holding everything else. Her name, I would learn later, was Cassidy. She was 31. She had come on as the shop's part-time social media and showroom girl 18 months earlier, and I had approved her hiring myself, from a resume, because Dorian said we needed a younger face for the website. I want to be honest about that too. I made mistakes. I hired the woman my husband was leaving me for, and I did it because I trusted him, and there is a specific kind of foolishness in that I have had to forgive myself for. It took a while. In February, I found the lump. It was on the left side of my throat, small and hard, the kind of thing you find in the shower and then can't stop touching. The doctor's face when she felt it did something I didn't like. Then came the scans, and the needle, and the 2 weeks of waiting that I would not wish on anyone. 2 weeks where the word cancer sits in the corner of every room you walk into. Here is what I remember about those 2 weeks. I remember that Dorian came to exactly one of the 4 appointments, and he checked his phone through most of it. I remember that when I told him the biopsy was inconclusive and they wanted to operate to be sure, he said, "Well, hopefully they can schedule it around the Hendricks install. Because I really need you on those invoices." I remember laughing, actually laughing, because I thought he was joking. He wasn't joking. I remember my sister, Junie. Junie lived 4 hours away, and she got in her car the day I called her, and she slept in a chair in my hospital room like it was nothing. Like, of course, where else would she be? Junie is the one who held my hand when they wheeled me down. Junie is the reason I know the difference now between people who perform love and people who provide it. Family, I have learned, is not who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when there's nothing in it for them. The surgery went fine. They took the left lobe. It was benign, a scare, not a sentence. I cried in the recovery room out of relief, and I remember thinking, through the fog of the anesthesia, that maybe this would change things. That maybe almost losing me would remind Dorian what he had. I came home on a Tuesday. He picked me up because Junie had to get back to her own family, and he was quiet the whole drive, and I mistook that quiet for tenderness. 6 days later, the navy folder was on the table. So, back to the kitchen. Back to the pen. You have nothing without me. You never did. I signed the last page. Not the divorce. I want to be clear about what I signed, because he assumed one thing and it was another. What he'd slid across the table was the petition and a proposed settlement his lawyer had drafted. A one-sided thing that gave him the business as separate property, and gave me half the house and a polite goodbye. There was a line on the last page acknowledging receipt of the documents. I signed the acknowledgement of receipt. I did not sign away a single thing. I just wanted him to feel like it was over, because a man who thinks he's already won stops paying attention. And then I said the only thing I said that morning. I said, "Okay." He blinked. He'd braced for a fight, and the absence of one unsettled him more than any argument could have. "Okay?" he said. "Okay," I said again. "I understand." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, and I did not cry, and I want to tell you that in that silence I was not planning revenge. Revenge is hot and fast and stupid, and my father taught me that anger burns through your good judgment first. What I felt was not hot. It was the coldest kind of clarity I have ever known. For 23 years I had confused being needed with being loved, and in one sentence at a kitchen table, the man I'd built a life around had finally told me the truth. He thought I was nothing. He was about to find out exactly how much nothing was worth. The next morning, while Dorian was at the shop, I drove across town to the bank with the safe deposit box. I sat in that little private room they give you, and I opened the fireproof folder, and I laid it all out on the table. 11 years of promissory notes, every one signed by Dorian Vale, every one notarized. The original loan agreement converting unpaid principal into equity, bank records showing the transfers, from my account to the business, going back to before we even had a shop. The corporate filings, because somewhere around year 6, when we incorporated to protect ourselves from a lawsuit, I had structured the ownership the way a bookkeeper structures things, quietly and correctly, and the majority of the shares had gone to the person who had put in the majority of the capital. Me! And the lease on the Fenwick Road building, 5 years remaining, in my name alone. Dorian had signed all of it. He'd signed it laughing. You and your paperwork. I did not gloat, sitting in that little room. I felt something closer to grief, honestly, because paper this good meant that the marriage had been a business he'd been slowly writing me out of, and I'd been the only one keeping the real accounts. But underneath the grief was something steadier, my father's voice. Keep the paper, keep your own copy. I made 2 appointments that week. The first was with a divorce attorney, a woman named Priya Venn, recommended by Junie, who came highly regarded and did not flinch at anything. The second was with a business attorney, because a divorce lawyer handles the marriage and a business lawyer handles the company, and I had finally understood that those were 2 very different battlefields, and I intended to win on both. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because this is the part people skip, and it's the part that matters. It would make a better story if I told you I marched into the shop the next day and slapped the papers down and watched his face crumble. That's not what happened, because that's not how you actually win. Anger burns fast. What I built took weeks. I said nothing. I healed. My voice came back. I made Dorian breakfast twice, because a woman who's making breakfast is not a woman anyone watches. I let him believe I was quietly falling apart, doing the sad math of a woman about to lose everything. He even got magnanimous about it. One night he told me, over the dinner I'd cooked, that I could stay in the house until the sale, and that he'd make sure I landed on my feet, and I said thank you. And I meant a completely different thank you than the one he heard. Meanwhile, in Priya's office and the business attorney's office, we built the case. We established, with documentation, that I was the majority shareholder of the corporation that owned Veilcraft, not his separate property, mine, by his own signature. We established that the loans had never been repaid, which meant the company owed me personally a principal plus interest sum that, by the time we calculated 11 years of it, came to a little over $240,000. We established that the building the shop operated out of was leased in my name, which meant that I, and only I, controlled whether Veilcraft had a roof over its machines. And we established one more thing, the thing that turned a strong position into an unassailable one. When you're the majority shareholder and the officers of a company have been using corporate funds for personal luxuries, a boat, a country club membership, a certain 31-year-old's new car that had quietly appeared on the company books as a marketing vehicle, you have the right to ask for an accounting. And what an accounting we found. I did not celebrate any of it. Every discovery was just another entry in a ledger I wished I'd never had to open. But paper doesn't lie, and the paper was all mine. The reckoning happened on a Thursday, in a conference room at Priya's firm, and Dorian walked in like a man attending his own victory party. He'd brought his lawyer, a slick young guy in an expensive suit, and I still don't fully understand why he'd brought Cassidy, who sat in the corner scrolling her phone like she was waiting out a dentist appointment. He'd brought Cassidy to the meeting where his marriage would be divided. That tells you everything about what he thought was going to happen. He thought he was going to watch me get handed my half of the house and shoot off the stage of his life. Priya let him talk first. His lawyer laid out the same one-sided offer, all confidence, explaining to me slowly, as if to a child, that the business was Dorian's separate property and I'd be wise to take the house money and go. When he finished, Priya opened a folder of her own. She slid the first document across the table. This is the Certificate of Incorporation for Veilcraft Incorporated, she said, and the accompanying share ledger. You'll note that Mrs. Ellison holds 62% of the issued shares. She let that sit. The business is not your client's separate property, counselor. The business is largely my client's property. Your client is, at present, a minority shareholder in a company his wife controls. The slick young lawyer stopped looking slick. She slid across the next stack. These are 11 years of notarized promissory notes, signed by your client, documenting personal loans from Mrs. Ellison to the business, none of them repaid. The current balance, with the contractually agreed interest, is $243,100. The company owes this money to my client personally. We are prepared to call the notes. Dorian's face. I told you I'd tell you about his face. It changed in real time, the way a window changes when the light behind it goes out. The color left it in stages. He looked at the papers. He looked at his lawyer. He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years, and I watched him understand. Priya slid across the last one, and her voice never rose. And this is the lease for the premises at 1400 Fenwick Road, held solely in Mrs. Ellison's name, with 61 months remaining. Mrs. Ellison is your landlord. She has, this morning, elected not to renew any sublease arrangement with the business, and given the outstanding debt and the shareholder majority, she'll be exercising her rights accordingly. The room was very quiet. In the corner, Cassidy had stopped scrolling. Dorian's voice came out cracked. "You can't, Mara. Mara, you wouldn't take the shop. That's my whole life. You know what it means to me." And I finally spoke. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I said, "I do know what it means to you, Dorian. It's the thing you built with your bare hands." I heard you say it 100 times. I folded my own hands on the table. "I'm not taking anything, I'm just stopping the part where I give. Here is what I want you to understand, because this is where a lesser story would turn ugly, and I refuse to let mine. I did not burn it down. I had every legal right to call the loans in full, seize control of the corporation, evict the business, and leave Dorian standing on Fenwick Road with a router and no roof. I could have handed him the exact nothing he'd handed me. I didn't, and not because he deserved mercy. He didn't. I did it because my father taught me that the goal is never to become the thing that hurt you. What I did was cleaner. Through Priya, I made one offer, and it was not a negotiation. Vailcraft, the company, the machines, the client list, the name on the sign would be dissolved and its assets sold. From the proceeds, I would be repaid the $243,000 I was owed, as the law required, before anyone else saw a dime. My 62% would be valued and paid out. The lease would end. The house would be sold and split, as he'd wanted, and I'd take my half. And Dorian, the artist, the visionary, the man who built it all with his bare hands, would walk away with what was actually his talent, his tools, and a minority shareholder's slice of a company that no longer existed. He fought it, for a while. His lawyer told him to. But you cannot fight your own signature. Every time they pushed, Priya laid another notarized page on the table, and the pages were all in his handwriting. In the end he took the settlement, because the alternative was worse, and because somewhere in there he finally understood that the woman he'd called nothing had been the foundation the whole house stood on. The last thing his lawyer said to Priya, in the hallway, was, "Where on earth did she get documentation like this?" And Priya, who I have loved ever since, said, "She kept the paper. I won't pretend the aftermath was clean, because life isn't, and I promised you the truth." Renata called me exactly once. Not to apologize, Renata is not built for apology. She called to tell me I was tearing the family apart over money, and I let her finish, and then I said, "Renata, I lent your son a fortune and he thanked me by trying to throw me away 6 days after surgery. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm just taking my half of what I built and leaving the rest for the people who think it grew on its own." Then I hung up, gently, and I have not spoken to her since, and I have not missed it. Cassidy left Dorian within 4 months. It turns out that visionary who built it all himself is a much less attractive man when the it is gone and the himself is renting a small shop on the edge of town. I don't take pleasure in that. I really don't. I just note it, the way you note weather. Dorian, to his credit, sent me one letter. A real letter, handwritten, months later. He didn't ask for anything. He said he'd spent his whole marriage thinking he was the one carrying us, and that it had taken losing everything to see that he'd had the ledger upside down the entire time. He said he was sorry. I believe he was. I read it twice because you always read things twice, and then I put it in a drawer, and I did not write back. Some doors close and stay closed, and making peace with that is its own kind of freedom. The one who surprised me was my father-in-law, Quiet Walter, who I'd assumed for 23 years was just furniture in Renata's house. He met me for coffee, unasked, and he told me that he'd watched his son treat me like staff for years and said nothing, and that his silence was its own kind of cowardice, and that he was ashamed of it. He said, "You were the best thing that ever happened to that boy," and he was too much like his mother to see it. Then he asked if he could still be part of my life, even after. I said yes. He calls me every couple of weeks. Family, it turns out, really is who shows up. I live in a smaller place now. A 2-bedroom with good morning light and a kitchen table I bought myself, and I'll tell you, there is a specific piece in a table where nobody is ever going to slide a navy folder across the surface of your life. I took the money, my repaid loans, my share of the company, my half of the house, and I did something my father would have loved. I didn't spend it. I opened my own bookkeeping and small business consulting firm. Ellison Financial. My name on the sign. For the first time in my life. I help other people, a lot of them women, a lot of them running businesses with partners who handle the vision, keep their own paper, read their own contracts, understand exactly what they own. Business is good. Business is very good, actually, because it turns out the world is full of quiet, reliable people who have been told they're nothing by someone who couldn't have functioned for a day without them. Junie visits once a month. Walter calls. I sleep through the night. My voice came all the way back, and it's a little lower than it used to be, and I like it better this way. Here's the lesson, and I'm going to say it plainly, because I wish someone had said it plainly to me 20 years ago. Being needed is not the same as being valued. You can hold up someone's entire world and still be invisible to them, right up until the moment you stop holding. And when someone tells you that you are nothing without them, listen very carefully, because that is not a description of you. That is a confession about them. It's what they need you to believe so they never have to find out how much of everything was actually you. Keep your own paper. Read everything twice. Know exactly what you own. Not because everyone will betray you, most people won't. But because your dignity should never depend on someone else choosing to be honest about your worth. I didn't win because I was cruel. I won because I was awake, and I was patient, and I never signed anything I hadn't read. And the man who told me I had nothing spent the rest of his life understanding that he'd been living inside the nothing the whole time, and calling it his. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. If you had spent 23 years quietly holding up someone's entire world, and they looked you in the eye at your most vulnerable moment, and told you that you were nothing without them, would you have signed in silence and walked away? Or would you have done what I did, and reminded them, one calm page at a time, exactly whose name was on everything? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. And if this story stayed with you, then the story of the woman whose grown children tried to vote her out of her own house at Thanksgiving, the one who let them think they'd won right up until she stood up and read one page aloud, that one will stay with you too. Watch it next. I think you'll understand exactly why she smiled. This is Aveline Justice, where the truth finally surfaces. New stories every single day. Subscribe and stay with me. There's always more truth coming to the surface, and I promise you it's always worth the wait.